state of emergency has been extended yet again. There is still uncertainty over the proposed reopening of the tourism sector, and still thousands remain out of work. Welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. During his contribution to the House earlier this week, Prime Minister Hubert Minnis announced that we are facing the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression 100 years ago. And his statements couldn't feel any more true. With unemployment benefits dropping to $100 per week and the country's largest economic engine still down, the economic pinch of this virus has touched all of us in one way or another. This week, we discuss charting a course to reopening with the top bosses in finance and tourism. Don't go anywhere. Our conversation begins right after this break. Watching On the Record, we're so glad you could join us. Tonight we discuss charting a course to reopening. November 1st was the date given as the proposed reopening of tourism in our country in many ways as we sought to get the economy up and running yet again. We are, however, seeing a new spike in cases daily. We've only passed the 6,000 mark, not a good number when you're looking at cases in this instance. The tough restrictions like a 7 p.m. curfew and weekend lockdowns continue, leaving us to wonder, where does that leave tourism? My guest for this portion of the show is the nation's chief in tourism, the Director General of Tourism, Mrs. Joy Jiberlou. DG, always good to have you on the record. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Jerome. Likewise, it's always a pleasure to be with you, even answering the tough questions.
This is a difficult time for us. One of the biggest questions on the minds of most people, myself included, are we still on track for this November 1st reopening in tourism? I think the Prime Minister would have hinted the easing of the travel restrictions, etc., which will come into force November 1st, signaling in many ways that that's going to be a reopening. Are we still on track as far as you're able to say?
Jerome, if you would just permit me to put in perspective where we are in terms of our international borders being open. If we look to the 15th of June, when we opened up with phase one, private aviation, boaters, yachters were allowed to enter the destination. On the 1st of July, we really then came out with the opening up of our borders for commercial travel. We know that by the end of July, our borders were not closed. Rather, restrictive measures were put in place. That was the requirement for a 14-day quarantine period, also the need to have a COVID RT-PCR negative test taken within 5 days. But our borders never closed to international travel. So if people think about it, we have had international flights coming in, Air Canada, JetBlue, American most recently, to name just a few. But the people who have come in on those flights have had to stay within the confines of where we are, quarantining, or as the Ministry of Tourism stated, vacationing in place for up to 14 days, as well as abiding by all the regulations that are in place due to where we are in New Providence and obviously Abaco at this time. And so now when we get to the 1st of November, there will be an easing of those restrictions. So we say reopening, but rather the reality is we are easing. So taking away the requirement for the 14-day vacation in place and replacing that upon arrival with the rapid antigen test. Prior to taking the rapid antigen test, I want to be very clear that everyone who enters the Bahamas, citizen, a legal resident, or a visitor, will still be required to have an RT-PCR test. The time frame for that moves from 5 days to a 7 day window. They will still need to apply for the travel health visa. So those requirements continue to be in place. But now, upon arrival, rapid antigen tests at the port of entry. If you test negative, you are free to continue on your vacation in the normal course for up to 96 hours. So 4 nights, 5 days. If you are staying beyond that period, anyone staying beyond a 5 day period must take a second rapid antigen test and then they can continue in the normal course. So, just wanted to make that clarification. A lot of people have asked, what does the new normal, what will that look like for travel and tourism come 1st of November? So, I hope that gives some perspective as to where we will be at that time.
It does, and thank you for clarifying that for us. One of the areas I think caused quite a bit of anxiety in July, we kept getting reports that, because we had so many ports of entry, people were coming in, we're very porous in that respect, that there were concerns that there was not the same level across the board, that there were things that were happening in, let's say, in New Providence and Grand Bahama were not happening in some of the other family islands. And this comes back to the question, are we going to be prepared to deal with the visitors to all of our ports of entry, all of our islands? That's a lot of testing, that's a lot of handling of people. And when you talk about now retesting in 4 to 5 days, that's another level as well. Who's going to be policing all of these things?
Such a great question. And this is the level of complexity and the mammoth task that has faced Ministry of Tourism, Ministry of Health, all of our stakeholders, private sector as well as public sector, to try and put in place the measures that will be needed to take care of the exact same things that you just talked about. How do you police all our borders? So one of the things that has happened and that will be different from 1st of November is there has been a limitation on approved ports of entry for this period. So we all know that we have multiple airports across the archipelago, international airports, and every island, in fact, many of the islands have not just one major port of entry, they have two or three. Eleuthera is a prime example. 3 international airports on that one island, Abaco, and so it continues across our archipelago, as I said, by limiting to 7 ports of entry for commercial aircraft and a similar number for persons coming in via sea. We have been able to at least begin to manage the process of setting up the required infrastructure so the testing can take place. It's much easier to set up at 7 airports rather than trying to do 24 airports. And so that's what's happened in terms of marinas. The government was very strategic in looking at all those touch points that any yachter leaving the Florida in particular, they would have to hit West End, Bimini, Great Harbor Key, New Providence, obviously. So the main ports that, or marinas that they would have to enter the Bahamas for customs and immigration, testing will be available, and obviously checking for your health visa, ensuring that you adhere and that you are in compliance with everything that's being put in place.
In addition to the relaxing of the restrictions, restricting airports, etc., what are the hotels saying to us? Those major hotels that have been closed and indefinitely, it seems in most cases. What's been the conversation with those major hotels? Because once people arrive, they're going to need somewhere to stay.
Yes. So as I said, this has just been really just, I can't describe the scope and the scale of trying to put this in place. and it is not something that government could do alone. It had to be in conversation with our private sector partners, both domestic and international as well. So let's take New Providence, which we know will receive the bulk of people entering the Bahamas. So we are working with NAD. The government is working with Doctors Hospital. They will be the private health sector solution to this. So when people arrive at LPIA moving forward, when you come off of your plane, before you even reach immigration, your health visa, you will now get a QR code when you are issued with an approved health visa. You will pull up to one of the screeners that's being managed by Doctors Hospital, trained by Doctors Hospital. Infrastructure will be in place. You will scan your QR code that will bring up your information. You take a rapid antigen test. I've never had one. I'm advised that it's a few seconds only. That test goes in a little box, and then you proceed through to immigration and customs. You will get a digital notification as to your status. So working with international partners who've done this, talking, and I'm bringing in many aspects of the conversation, insurance companies, etc. The bulk, in fact, 98, 99% of people will test negative. That's what we're hoping. So whatever you put in place, it is intended to mitigate. That's what we're seeking to do. So knowing that you take an RT-PCR test, there's an intervening period. That's why a rapid test upon arrival. So everyone will go to their hotels, they will check in. They get that notification. If they're negative, they get a free to go. You can go for up to 4 days. If you test positive, working with our hotel partners, rooms have been designated where people will be able to self-isolate depending on whether they're asymptomatic. Obviously, if they begin to present with symptoms, it becomes a Ministry of Health, a public health issue. But public health will be notified from that point of notification if anybody tests positive, and then it does become in the normal course, as it would if Jerome or Joy test positive, a public health matter.
What then happens to those who are not staying at hotels, Airbnbs, for example, or people who may be coming to stay with family?
The same thing. So if you are asymptomatic, as it would be in your case, my case, the case of any Bahamian, public health will demand that we self-isolate. Obviously, with the rapid antigen test, if someone tests positive, you will be required to take a second rapid antigen test. We know that the rapid antigen test, our health officials have told us over and repeatedly, it does not meet the accuracy level of an RT-PCR test. Hence the reason that they say that they do not take the results of a rapid antigen test. Rather, that notifies them or alerts them to the possibility. So if upon this second rapid antigen test, testing positive, then you will be required to take an RT-PCR test to confirm whether you are in fact COVID positive or it was a false positive reading from the rapid antigen test. And as I indicated, as many Bahamians who have presented with positive results but are not manifesting symptoms, they are asked to self-isolate. The COVID unit, enforcement unit, also then comes into play. So they are notified and they then take on, as has been happening in the normal course, the monitoring of those persons, whether in an Airbnb, in a residence, if it's a Bahamian, or in a hotel.
DG, we've got a lot more to talk about, but we've got to take a break. Don't go anywhere. We are discussing charting a course to reopening. Stay tuned. So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
At the offering more the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. This segment is brought to you by our friends at Executive Printers. With the Bahamas being a large import service economy whose dependencies rely almost solely on tourism and financial services to generate foreign exchange earnings, it's difficult to think of the Bahamas without tourism. Tourism alone provides approximately 60% of the Bahamas' GDP and employs more than half of the Bahamian workforce, both directly and indirectly. And it is for this reason there is such a great demand on this industry to bounce back as soon as possible. To help us discuss charting a course to reopening, my guest tonight is the Director General of Tourism, Mrs. Joy Gibberlew. DG, when do we expect our cruise ships to begin returning with passengers? And is that going to be sort of a phased approach as well?
So these are the questions that obviously are top of mind for everyone. You know, the great news, Jerome, is that the strength of the Bahamas' tourism industry in terms of contribution to GDP comes from our stopover visitors. So while those numbers are smaller, and when you consider the totality of the visitor arrival numbers to the Bahamas, the strength of the earning power is those stopover visitors coming in. So with them coming first, with us focusing on the stopover visitor arrivals, that actually is great for us because it gets money back into the economy, particularly our family islands, which are really being seen as a place that people want to visit for all the reasons that we could imagine. Just the freedom of being on the water, on the beach. But also the numbers are small, so you can start managing, ensuring the processes that are in place that they're working. Notwithstanding, we are in constant communication with the cruise lines company, saying how do they return to business and return safely. Obviously, the fact of them not coming into any destination had nothing to do with either the cruise companies or the destinations, the Bahamas in this particular instance, but rather with work that was going on with the Center for Disease Control in the United States and the no sail order that currently exists. So as we look for coming out of that order and seeing the return of cruising, new protocols, new measures are being put in place. Many of them that are being discussed, talked about, actually mirror what we have put in place in the Bahamas. Pre-testing for passengers going on cruising and testing while on that cruise line. Cruise lines have indicated they don't want to start off with long cruises. That makes sense. They don't want to be stuck on sea for 10 days and something happens. So if you look at a 3-day and a 5-day cruise option, the Bahamas is best poised because of our location. And so we feature strongly in their rebound and in their coming back. So as I've indicated, there is talk with a number of the cruise lines that when the opportunity presents and they're able to sail, they would like to begin with short stay sails to the Bahamas. In some instances, in fact, most instances, they're looking at yes, maybe a private island, but if they do a 2-island stop and then return to the US, Nassau and or Grand Bahama will have to feature in that. So that bodes well for the return of that industry, but we want to see it done in a measured way. We don't want to see, because we just at this time need to be able to ensure that the protocols work, that we can cope, we can manage, and where we are as a country in terms of coronavirus and our source market is, we want to be extremely cautious. So concern
I
back.
have to ask though, given our current circumstances with our rising numbers, when we look at where we feature prominently in terms of cases per capita, deaths per 100, things of that nature, our numbers are high. Does the data still show that people want to come here, or is there a growing concern that the Bahamas is not a safe place to come? Even as some countries have indicated and have said to their citizens, don't come to the Bahamas because of the high rate of infection. Are we still an attractive destination?
One of the things that we do at the Ministry of Tourism is follow the data, look at surveys. In fact, we conduct our own blind surveys as well, look at the market intelligence. And it is surprising. The Bahamas continues to be a destination that people are very, very interested in. They're interested because the primary um, attraction at this period for people who want to travel from our number one source market is beach. They don't necessarily want to do it on a crowded in a crowded space. So if you look at what we have to offer in the Bahamas, and if you look at the totality of the Bahamas, not just New Providence, not just Abaco, the beauty of us promoting 16 island destinations, so people say, I know about the Exumas, I know what their numbers are, I know about Long Island, even Cat Island, and we're able to market that. So we are painfully aware and deeply concerned about our numbers, deeply concerned in the opening or the broader opening of the tourism sector, that how do we protect Bahamians, residents, and also our guests coming in. And I'm going to speak in a moment of one of the things that we're also doing to help in trying to do what we can to protect this. But these numbers are a concern, but it doesn't seem to be for the majority of people. We don't see numbers in the data, in the market intelligence, saying that there's a lessening of interest in visits to the Bahamas because of our rise in the numbers at this time.
And how do you also ensure that all of these measures that we have put in place really do not negatively impact the tourism experience? I mean, as it stands now, we're on weekend lockdowns. You know, we're in by 7 p.m. every evening. We're all wondering and hoping if that's going to change soon. But what things are being put in place to ensure, or are you concerned that the visitor experience may be negatively impacted by all of these things that are put in place?
That is such a great question. And the reason for that is one of the things that is being communicated, and in fact was communicated, I'm one to say months ago, but certainly weeks ago, when the 1st of November was designated as the date that we would release or remove these restrictions, was that there would be ability for our guests to go on the beach. There would be the ability to enjoy restaurants, obviously, while observing all the health and safety protocols in place, that they would be able to go on excursions while observing all the health and safety protocols. And so that is what we have been communicating. That is what a visitor coming to the destination from the 1st of November expects, that there would be a reduction on the restrictions. Now, balancing that to where we are now, it is causing concern at the back of our minds. Ministry of Tourism, we're meeting with health officials and obviously the competent authority. I think at that time it will be discussed where we are and what can happen on the 1st of November. So, Joy, personally, I have a little niggling concern what will happen, what will be said, knowing that this is what we communicated and this is what people who are coming from that time will be expecting. But I want to caution, even though we're saying the 1st of November, being mindful of the fact that we have been open primarily and we've seen the return of airlines and the uptick in airlines coming in, there's not going to be a surge on the 1st of November. We don't expect to see until coming up to Thanksgiving and certainly by December. And by then, my sincerest prayer is that we collectively have this situation well under control and that all of us can enjoy what is available in this new normal of masking, social distancing, in hand sanitization.
I know that when we were preparing to reopen in July, there was a lot of work done with the tourism stakeholders, the small businesses, everybody involved. Are we going to see that again in terms of instituting those safety protocols and measures? There was a lot of work done. Is that ongoing? Is that going to start again? What can the people in tourism expect in terms of making sure that they are safe and their families? Because at the end of the day, you have to go back home to your loved ones once you're finished working.
Uh, Again, this is so top of mind for all of us. So all the processes, procedures, protocols that were put in place with the creation of the Tourism Readiness and Recovery Plan, those remain. I think I mentioned to you several months ago that at that time the Ministry of Tourism had trained approximately 8,000 people. Since that time, we've trained over 18,000 tourism stakeholders on how to actually put in practice and implement these health and safety protocols. Beyond that, the Ministry of Tourism has created online training portals that anyone in the tourism industry can go online, download the training modules, and they can conduct training for themselves. So we don't even know, as a result of that, how many more people have been trained. But even more pertinently, in this new order of where we are, one of the things that is happening, and we're seeing more and more, is that people within the tourism sector, they're taking the lead, they're being proactive. The introduction of the rapid antigen test has been a game changer. It's affordable, it's quick, it's easy. So many employers are doing employee testing on a regular basis. And a lot of the properties, what they're saying, those who are front facing will be tested a lot more regularly than those who are obviously behind the scenes and not interacting with visitors or others as much. But that's becoming the norm. Taxi drivers are talking that they will be tested, our bus drivers with the rapid antigen test. So it will become the norm that everyone interfacing in the tourism sector will know their status. And this is one way, even for me as an employee working in tourism, to have that assurance to my family. Well, I tested on Monday, I'm testing again the following Monday, and I know that I am presented with a negative COVID result.
Director General, thank you so very much for coming on. You always bring us great information. We can tell there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, gives us a little bit more comfort as we move towards this November 1st date. We hope and pray like you that things hold and we're able to relax those restrictions even as the numbers continue to climb and even as our neighbors continue to see that second surge. We hope and pray that this new norm is going to in some way be able to get our economy moving slowly but surely again, as it is so very needed. Thank you again. Best of luck to you, and certainly we'll be reaching out again to you sometime in the near future.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure, and so much information. So
Yes.
any opportunity that I can share that, not a problem.
Thank you very much. Well, when we return, we're going to continue our conversation on charting a course to reopening with the man who is responsible for holding the nation's purse strings. Don't go anywhere. So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
Not the conference, more the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV. Hello and welcome to On the Record, and a balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. back. You're watching On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Tonight we discuss charting a course to reopening. In recent weeks, the government's decision to secure a $600 million bond from international capital markets has garnered a whole lot of attention. Criticism about the government's borrowing, the high interest rate, and even years of repayment have all been the center of discussion. Here tonight to discuss our economic recovery is the Minister of Finance himself, Deputy Prime Minister, the Honourable Peter Turnquest. DPM, I've got to start by asking you, how are you doing? How are your cabinet colleagues doing? I know that you all have gone into quarantine now since we found out late yesterday evening, that Minister Desmond Bannister tested positive. How is the Minister doing? How is the rest of the cabinet doing?
The Minister continues to be asymptomatic and seems to be doing well, and so thank God for that. The rest of the cabinet is also likewise doing well. We have no additional positive cases thus far, and so we are hopeful that will remain the case. And we continue to be hard at work trying to continue our efforts to keep the Bahamian people safe, provide relief where we can, and to chart the recovery as we go forward.
Are you all planning to test while you're in quarantine at this point?
I can't say whether all ministers will, but I am certainly about to be tested very shortly.
Okay, all right. We won't keep you too long. Be sure that you get to that. Let's talk dollars and cents now. In August of this year, it was revealed that the national debt stood at $8.24 billion for the fiscal year 2019-2020. Since then, we've continued the fight against COVID-19 and seen the most recent bond that was secured. Where are we now in terms of our national debt, sir?
So you've accurately given the picture, and we've just added the $600 million, as you indicated, and that will be in addition to roughly $500 million that we would have borrowed from various other sources just prior to that, since July. So we have completed roughly 45% of our required borrowing, and we are scheduled in the new year to complete that as necessary with domestic banks and financial institutions if, as I say, it becomes necessary.
A couple things. Can you help us to understand? You say 45% of your borrowing. What does that mean? It seems that there's a lot more to go. I mean, is that put that into terms we can understand?
So we had anticipated that we would borrow $1.33 billion this year for our financing needs to meet the budget shortfall, meaning that we anticipated that we would have increased expenditure this year in excess of revenue collected of $1.3 billion, which we would have to go out to borrow from various sources. We try to get most of our credit from international financial institutions, multilateral institutions like the IMF, sorry, not the IMF, but the IDB, the Caribbean Development Bank, and those kinds of institutions, because they give us better interest rates. But in addition to that, we have to look into the bond market, the capital market, to fill the balance. And then once we've done those borrowings, which we use primarily for foreign currency borrowings, then we look to the domestic market for the balance of our Bahamian dollar requirements. So of that $1.3 billion, as I indicated, we've borrowed somewhere around $1.1 billion of that so far, and the balance of it will come from the domestic market.
Help us to understand, so what are these funds being allocated for? What are we using these monies for? This is a huge amount of borrowing that's being heaped on the heads of the Bahamian taxpayers. What are we using these monies for?
So there are a couple of components to this. The basic use of the funds is for budgetary support, meaning that as a result of the pandemic and the closure of the borders to tourism in the main, we have had a significant drop in overall tax revenue. Of course, we need that revenue because that's what we use to pay government commitments, salaries, rents, electricity, utilities, etc., as well as provide the support for social interventions that the government may deem necessary. So this money that we would have borrowed to date would be used primarily to fill the gap, to repay bonds or loans that may be coming due. And I think if memory corrects me, serves me right, it's about 692 million of debt of existing loans that would have been coming due this year. And so we would pay those loans, as well as use the balance to fulfill our requirements for social support, for business continuity support, for income replacement support for individuals, for the increased cost of building out infrastructure, and for operational costs in the healthcare system to accommodate the increased costs as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So those are the primary uses of those funds.
In essence, we are also borrowing to pay monies that we owe already. I mean, in practical business sense, that doesn't seem to make sense, but we are borrowing money to pay back loans, correct?
That is correct. One of the unfortunate things about the Bahamas, and not just us, other countries around the world, is that we very rarely pay down our borrowings. And that's why we have this massive debt that you referenced earlier, 8.4. That's going to roughly be, I think, projected to be 9.3 at the end of the year. We have amassed debt year after year as a result of deficit spending year after year, and we've not been able to find our way to creating a balanced budget or a surplus budget that would give us the freedom and the opportunity to pay down on those debts. And so because we do not have the cash available, we have to go out and borrow new funds to pay off those old funds so that we can roll over the debt. And that is a problem that, like I said, we've inherited for years, and it keeps amassing. It is why when coming to office, we made it a priority to put ourselves on a fiscal consolidation plan and to tie that into legislation so that we are forced to be disciplined about it, to bring that annual deficit number down to 0.5% of GDP, so that we start to create the fiscal room, the cash that we need in order to pay off these loans, rather than keeping rolling them over year after year after year, and seeing the kind of growth which will eventually become unsustainable. We've also established a sinking fund to set aside money into a designated account so that we have the funds available, particularly with our new debt, the debt that we are now entering into, putting monies aside into an account that we will not touch to ensure that we have the funds available to pay these loans as they become due. So this is a significant challenge that we've had, and we're not alone in this. As I said, if you look around the world and the ramp up of national debts, it really only triggers back to one factor, and that is that we have been consistently running deficits year after year, which is not a bad thing in and of itself, but you have to have a plan to manage that, and hopefully the rate of economic growth outstrips the rate of the increase in deficits.
You know, Minister, I hear this, we're going to move on quickly, which is people, and it buys into the statement that people always say that governments need to be run more like businesses, because you can't run a business year after year that's running in a deficit. We're going to move forward, though. With the recent $600 million being secured, a lot of people have been criticizing the government for settling on such a high interest rate. Explain to us why this route was taken, and this rate was chosen, and the years of maturity.
So just on your last point, unfortunately, governments cannot work like businesses, because while you can make cut and dry decisions as a business, because you're profit driven, government works for the benefit of the people. And so while the service that you provide may not generate a return, it is in the best interest of the social welfare of the entire community as a whole. And so sometimes there is a misalignment of the investment versus the direct return.
Different
So,
priorities, of course.
yeah, you can't really balance it in that way. Uh,
So let's
but
talk about the 600 million,
so in terms,
the high interest rate that people are criticizing, and the why that rate was chosen and the years of maturity.
right. So with respect to the bond that we have just issued, one of the things that we have to appreciate is that we do not operate in a vacuum. That our investors, people who buy our government debt, are fully aware of our circumstance. They are fully aware of the market in which we operate, and they're fully aware of global and domestic economic outlooks. So in this particular circumstance, investors would be aware that we were significantly affected by Hurricane Dorian, which would have impacted 18% of our overall GDP, being Grand Bahama and Abaco, which were taken offline. And so right away, we would have had a reduction in our level of economic activity just as a result of that one event. Coming right on the heels of that, you have this global pandemic, which has seen us having to take some very significant measures to try and keep it under control, which included lockdowns and now very significant curfews, the 7 to 5 a.m. during the week and the full lockdown on the weekends here in New Providence. This too has had a significant impact on our overall economic activity and the level of revenue, tax revenue, that the government will receive as a result of the reduction in that economic activity. So as the global investors look at the outlook for the Bahamas, they take into account this reduction in overall economic activity and revenue prospects for the government, meaning the government's ability to repay. It also takes into account the increase in cost, which is occurring at the same time as this reduction in revenue. So you have reduced revenue, increased cost, and the imbalance that causes, and potentially balance of payment issues that arise as a result of that. And they make risk assessments. Add to that, we've had a downgrade from the Standard & Poor's and Moody's over the last year, which also weighs into evaluation of the overall risk that the country will be able to meet its commitments as they fall due. So when you consider all of that, and they consider the macro environment from our source markets, the US, Canada, Europe, and what's happening there, and they're having similar challenges in terms of their economic production, they make a educated decision on what they feel they are entitled to as a risk premium. In other words, if I'm going to give you as a risky investment, lend you money, then I expect you to pay me a little bit more for accepting that risk. So we go out into the market to our investor community, and we present the facts of the Bahamas. We give the story of the successes that we were having in our financial consolidation plan up to the impact of the coronavirus. And it showed a very positive trend, which they bought into and which they can see and appreciate. But then we had the impact of coronavirus, and they would have seen the impacts that has had. And they project out what the reality is going to be for the short and the medium term. We lay that out for them. We give them the optimistic picture about how we believe there's going to be a recovery in 2021, late 2021, 2022. And they take that information away and as I say, do their assessments. The pricing matrix that they go through, or the price discovery as they call it, that they go through, is a scientific mathematical model where they determine, based upon who is interested in lending us money, who is the players in the market, um, and what size of interest we've been able to generate. Of course, the more persons we have interested in our paper, the lower the rates go. In this case, we were able to attract interest of about $1.1 billion. And having considered all of the players, the rates were settled at about 8.95%. So that has nothing to do with us. It has nothing to do with any individual player. It is market conditions that dictate the rates. Secondly, in terms of the tenor or the terms of the loan, when they mature, we obviously try to take them out as far as we can, given our overall debt management strategy. In other words, we don't want any balloon payments in any one year that puts tremendous strain on us, particularly if we are not able to refinance them. So we spread them out as best we can. And so we would look at our existing maturities and find a period where we can add these maturities so that we have an even flow of repayments over the long term.
As we go to the break, sir, I just want to very quickly ask you, are you satisfied that this was the best possible deal that we could have gotten for the Bahamian people?
I am satisfied this is the best deal we could have gotten given all of the circumstances that we currently are faced with. Remember, earlier in the year when pandemic first came on, our bonds were trading somewhere in the region of 12 to 15%. So the rates have actually come down to 8.95%. And we believe that this was the best time for us to get into the market because we do not know what the future holds. And the market was ready and accepting of our issue. We felt that this was the best time for us to go, and this is the best rate that we could achieve during this particular time.
We've got a couple more questions for you, though, but we've got to take a quick break. I know you've got a lot going on, so we will let you go. Stay with us, though. We're going to take a break and come back with our final segment right after this. Hello and welcome to On the Record, and a balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. Welcome back. You're watching On the Record. During his contribution in the House earlier this week, Prime Minister Minnis outlined some of the recommendations made by the Economic Recovery Committee and stated that his cabinet will continue to review the committee's summary for possible policy implementations. My guest for this portion of the show, the Minister of Finance, Deputy Prime Minister Kate Peter Turnquest. DPM, as we get ready to wrap up, just wanted to go back very quickly. Very early on in the interview, you mentioned the level of borrowing that we were at 45%. That was slightly off?
Yeah, it's about 55%.
So it's a little bit higher than what we said in the beginning. Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Will we see an increase in taxation following this pandemic? We've talked about the level of debt, how much money we owe. Will that be translated into more taxes for us?
No, we do not anticipate any additional taxes. Of course, circumstances are always subject to change. And one of the things that I always say about the Ministry of Finance is that we're not in the business of predicting government policy per se. We look at the numbers, and the numbers will dictate. But I can tell you that at this particular time, that we do not see in our immediate forecast any need to increase taxes. Our projections that we presented in June with the budget show us a gradual path back to fiscal consolidation with the existing level of taxes. And we believe that that will provide sufficient room for us to be able to get to where we need to be in terms of our overall target of achieving fiscal consolidation of 0.5% of deficit to GDP in 2027, I think it is, or 2028. So we are comfortable where we are with the assumption that we are going to be able to return to economic activity, not necessarily at the levels we were before, but to reasonable levels of economic activity within the next 12 to 18 months. And all things holding equal, we will be okay.
Will we see any austerity programs, like letting civil servants go or letting folks go who are close to retirement age? I mean, that continues to be a big bill for the government on a monthly and an annual basis. Are we looking to see, are there going to be any austerity measures?
No, we have said that we do not intend to do any significant downsizing of the public service. We understand the value that they bring to the economy as well as to the services that they provide to the Bahamian people. And so we do not want to do that. However, we also have said that we will certainly limit the number of new hires to only those that are essential at this time. And we will continue to facilitate the retirement of those who may decide that they have reached that point where they need to take their well-earned reward. We are looking at our state-owned enterprises to see how we can further make them more efficient and operate more on a cost recovery basis. And we believe that there's tremendous opportunity there. But overall, no, we do not anticipate any reduction austerity, quote unquote, measures having to be implemented.
So there's been a lot of public outcry and commentary on the $20 million spent on the construction of sidewalks. How do you justify spending that kind of money when people are crying out for monies for basic things, and and it just seemed like a bad move at a time like this?
So I think the Minister of Works has addressed this issue. That it's not 20 million; it's actually 2 million that's being spent on
2 million. Okay.
Sidewalks. But even that, when you look at it, what we are doing is engaging in activity that will put people to work, that will preserve the dignity of these persons who are not receiving a handout, but are in fact receiving pay for work that they are engaged in. And so this is one way to put the Bahamian people's money to productive use. And so I don't see it as a waste of money at all. This is in fact work that is necessary, that needed to be done in a lot of instances. And it is getting some form of return for the investment of the Bahamian people is putting in to the community through all of these programs.
Help us to understand how that employment works. When those people go to work, what is the effect of that?
So each of these persons would be receiving whatever the wage is. At a minimum, will be minimum wage. I don't know what their levels are. But those persons go to the food store. They pay their rent. They pay their mortgages. They feed their children and all of the other things that are necessary for a basic quality of life. That creates economic stimulus. Those monies then are used for other things. And so you end up with domestic activity that helps to generate additional tax revenue that can be put back into the economy to create additional stimulus, as well as to provide social support for those who need it.
Prime Minister in his presentation also spoke about increasing the amount of funding available to small businesses to $250 million over the next 5 years. Why are these monies so important? And why is this an important thing for government to do?
So one, we have to start to look towards the recovery. That is, what is the Bahamian economy, domestic economy, going to look like coming out of this pandemic? And we are betting big, as we call it in the Ministry of Finance. We are betting big on small business, on Bahamian entrepreneurs. We believe that they possess the talent, the expertise, the drive to help us to bridge this period where our international guests, arrivals may not be at the levels that we need them to be in order to help sustain us. And so we can get a baseline of domestic economy going, that will help us to ride through this particular down period in foreign direct investment. And so we're investing this $55 million in new entrepreneurship to help carry the burden In addition to that, we are providing business continuity loans to help those businesses who would have seen a significant downturn in the business as a result of what's happening. We're also giving tax incentives as well as tax credits to businesses, again, to help them through this period to maintain as much employment as possible so that we don't have more and more people joining the unemployment lines.
What has been the impact of this pandemic on the collection of VAT? And had we not increased the VAT to 12%, where would we have been, or where would we be economically?
Well, again, if we did not have these kinds of interventions, you can well appreciate that without income, without the ability to access social services or national insurance, unemployment benefit programs, that we would have an economic collapse. And the demand and the misery index that we talk about would be through the roof. It is just not possible for the government not to do its part to try and shore up the overall economic activity, provide opportunities for Bahamians, as well as to provide support for them in circumstances where they have no other alternatives. It is counterintuitive to understand that the government has to spend more money when it's actually receiving less money. But it is necessary to provide that basic foundation so that the overall economy does not collapse.
I know, sir, that you sit around the cabinet table with your colleagues. Last time the Prime Minister spoke to the country, he talked about lifting the travel restrictions come November 1st so that we don't have that 14-day period where people have to quarantine and some other things. Are we still on track for that to happen on November 1st?
At the moment, yes, we are. We know that there has been an increased level of cases, but at the moment, we are still on track for the 1st of November. And I'm sure that the Ministry of Health professionals, as well as the tourism professionals, are looking at these numbers every day and making decisions as we go forward. This is a very fluid and dynamic circumstance, and decisions that are being made, that need to be made, have to reflect the fluidity of the situation, unfortunately.
We talked about it at the top of the interview, but how is all of this now going to affect your ability to govern? You can't go back to the House of Assembly as scheduled. Has there been any discussion on how this is going to affect your work and what needs to happen even from a legislative perspective?
So certainly from a government perspective, that is the management of the various agencies and ministries, we're able to interact with our staff as we're doing here today very effectively, and we've had no real challenges in that regard. As you spoke, I'm chock-blocked with meetings today, getting things done. We're able to execute documents electronically and whatever needs to be done. The cabinet will meet virtually, as we have done before during the first lockdown, and the House will meet with those members that are not in quarantine as we look at the overall setup of Parliament to see how we might be able to take that also to a virtual setting. So we're going to have to use some very creative measures to go forward, but in the meantime, work continues. We continue to be engaged and doing the things that we need to do to ensure that the Bahamian people get what they need.
Sir, as we wrap up tonight, I'm going to ask you a question that's on my mind, and I'm sure that's on the minds of thousands of viewers. As I drive, to and from the studio, or I have to go out, I drive along, I see businesses closed down, I see streets empty. You see the evidence of no activity, hotels closed up, and you get this sense of foreboding, this fear sometimes. What is going to happen to our country? How are we going to survive? Are we going to get out of this? What do you say to people, when they have those same feelings day in, day out of fear, the fear of the unknown, of are we going to recover? Are we in capable hands? How are we going to get through this? What do you say to those folks, sir?
I would say that first off, we are absolutely in very capable hands. I can assure you that the government of the Bahamas has this matter in full view in front of them, and we're dealing with the issues every day. Even as we plan for the future and for the recovery, as we talked about a little bit earlier. The reality is that we are hopeful that there will be a vaccine coming out soon. We also, every day, there's improvements in the treatment modalities for persons, which gives us hope that even if you are unlucky enough to contract the virus, that you'll be able to recover with appropriate treatment. And we also know that this is not going anywhere, that the world is having to live with this virus. That means that there are going to be protocols and there are going to be modalities that are going to be created for us to be able to work alongside this. We also know that the Bahamas sits in a very enviable position in terms of our pristine environment and what we offer. People want to come to escape what they may be facing back home, to come to a destination like the Bahamas, to relax, get away from all the cares of the world in a safe environment, and be able to recreate. That gives us hope that our tourism product is going to come back, and even where we might even have longer stay visitors that will come and stay in the Bahamas. Of course, we have to get our situation under control, and that is our focus today, to get our own instance of community spread and hospitalizations down to a point where they're manageable, and we're able to advertise to the world that the Bahamas is a safe place to come. You will be well taken care of here, and in the unfortunate event that you would have contracted the virus, that we're able to take care of.
Deputy Prime Minister, thank you so very much for coming on and speaking with us tonight. I know you've got a busy schedule. Thank you for fitting us in. We really do appreciate it. I hope that you and your cabinet colleagues are well, and that this quarantine is certainly just a precautionary measure at this point. And of course, we wish the very best to your cabinet colleague who is at home convalescing, having tested positive as well. So thank you again for coming on. We appreciate you spending this time with us.
Thank you, Jordan.
All right, that's going to do it for tonight's episode of On the Record, charting a course to reopening. Special thanks to both of my guests for joining us. Thanks to my technical team, and of course to you, our viewers, for watching us week after week. We'll see you again next time, same place, right here on The Record.